All right, so this is our January 28th lecture. We're going to be talking through some additional workbook problems. And I'm going to cold call some people and see how we do. And then we're going to break out into some rooms to discuss some of the bigger problems today. So to start with, we're going to jump into the last couple sort of simple problems, problem 3 and problem 4. The first one, number 3, a course can have several sections. Each section pertains to one course. This actually is a little bit tricky. And looks like next person on my list for a random call is Luke Bryans. Luke, are you here?
Yes, sir, I'm right here.
Great. You want to take a crack at this?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to stop my share and you can feel free to share your screen if you'd like.
Awesome. Let me find it. Let me just pull it up real quick. Okay, there we go. Share screen. Okay. So I don't know if this was correct or not, but I don't think it was now, kind of after going back from yesterday or from 2 days ago.
Okay.
But I just want to read what it said again. It said, a course can have several sections. Each section pertains to one course. Okay. So I opened up with the, okay, so each course, I guess, has at least one section, but it can have multiple sections. So that's why I have the crow's feet, I guess, with the
mandatory
one, right
one, but maximum
mandatory
many.
one.
That seems reasonable.
Right. And then I would guess probably on the other side, it would need each section would apply to, I guess, just one course.
Yes. And it's both minimum and maximum one, right? Yeah. Because if you think about it, if you're a section, it belongs to ISTM 313 and only ISTM 313. Can't belong to any other courses, but it has to belong to a particular course. If it doesn't belong to a course, what is it? Yeah. So this is an interesting one because the other thing that.
So I don't know if
Go ahead.
Oh, sorry. No, my internet cut out, so I didn't hear that you were talking.
Just saying that this is a minimum and mandatory one. And this is an interesting one because the other thing that's happening here is section will never exist unless a course exists. So if we go back to some of the earlier examples we talked about in the slides, what is this a similar parallel to? Let's ask somebody else. Tiffany, are you here?
Yes.
So does this look like something else we talked about in the slide deck?
Maybe the second one because, right, the first one because without students, you can't have a course.
It's similar in some ways, but when we look at those earlier examples, you could enter a student, and a student is sort of a self-contained entity. Students exist. Now, we may not put them into our database unless they were enrolled in a course, but they kind of still exist, right? So the idea that we're thinking about here, and somebody's jumping the gun here a little bit on the chat, which is fine, that's great, is that sections are kind of what we would call a weak entity. There's no reason for a section to exist at all, and in fact, it kind of can't exist by itself unless the course existed first. So sort of like dependents for family members probably can't exist in the database really on their own unless we had the family member as an employee to start with. But at the same time, sections might be kind of critical, right? If I have multiple sections of a course, students are enrolled in a very specific section of that course. They're not just enrolled in the overall parent course, they're enrolled in the specific section. So there's some criticality to the existence of this section, but how you actually store it, I don't know, that's kind of tricky, right? So if you sort of think about what attributes you'd associate with the course side of things and the section side of things, the course side of things would be kind of the generic stuff, the title of the course, the number of credit hours, that sort of thing. But the section has a lot of critical information, a specific time and date that the course is offered. And the section is probably what's connected to an enrollment table, who's actually taking the classes, because you're taking a specific section of a course, not just the course in general. So this is an interesting one for sure. And when we get farther along and actually try to build this stuff into a real database, building something like this section course relationship would definitely be kind of interesting. So fairly simple question, but there's actually a little bit of room for interesting interpretation as far as how this actually works. Yeah. Okay, great. Let's take a look at the fourth question, which you guys probably have sitting in front of you. The fourth one was, a textbook is used in only one course and a course can have several textbooks. This is interesting phrasing in that it has a limitation that I don't know is that realistic, but we're going to try to model it in our picture according to the way this is described. So Ali Absar, are you here?
Yeah, I'm here.
All right, this is your turn. Feel free to share your screen if you want and take a crack at this.
It's making me do my settings real quick.
Quick question while he's getting that set up, Professor. For the last one, I noticed that his had a mandatory many, but couldn't it be true, and maybe you did go over this and I blanked out for a second, but couldn't it be true that if the course can have several sections, that it could only have one section, so it could be an optional many?
No, you're right. It's not, but the way the optional works is the optional on the minimum side. So the minimum side is you have to have a minimum of one, but you could have 2 or 3 or 4 or 7 or 12. If you draw a crow's foot with a 0, what it means is you could have a minimum of 0, but you could have 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 or 7 or 12. So the optional 0, 1 is only on the lowest end of it, which is you might have none of them. And in this case, every class has to have at least one section to exist as a class. This class has one section, only one section, but it has to have at least one.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Good question. That 0, 1 in this case has to do with only the minimum side. Now, on the other side, if it wasn't a crow's foot, it might be another 1, and that would be that it can have at most 1. And that's never going to be a 0, right? That's either going to be a 1 or a many. It's either going to be a crow's foot or a single symbol, which is we only have a 1-to-1 relationship, or we have a many-to relationship. Yeah. I'm sorry, did you get things worked out?
It says I have to quit it and reopen it after I fix my system
All right, well,
settings.
let's skip you for now, and maybe you can figure that out at some point. We'll come back to you. That's fine. Elise Dobos, are you here?
Yes, sir.
Great, your turn.
Perfect. Share screen. Now I can't see it. Can y'all see that?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, perfect. So this is what I did for number 4. In the bottom one, the textbook can be used in the minimum of 1 course, the maximum of 1 course. And then going the other way, I did that a course can use an option of having no textbook, or it can use multiple textbooks.
Okay, I'll open it up to the peanut gallery. Any comments on this drawing in terms of how it is worked out? I certainly have a question about it. I'm hoping somebody else does too.
Could the course not have a textbook?
She has it drawn that way, which is if you go from the course towards the textbook, the minimum number of textbooks that it has is 0, which is this class, right? We have no textbooks. So that's certainly a possibility. But the course could also have many, right? The maximum number is the crow's foot, which is you could have 6 textbooks in a class. What about the other direction?
The textbook doesn't have to be used in a course, so it's an optional one.
I think that the minimum number going towards the course could be 0. Now, let's ask our original author, Elise, why did you make it a mandatory minimum 1?
I think just the way it was worded, I just assumed. But then when I put a 0 that a course doesn't have to textbook, I guess it doesn't really make sense that going backwards, a textbook has to be used. So it kind of
Yeah, I think
contradicts
this is the way you
itself a
could
little.
potentially think about it is, do we even type the textbook into the textbook table if it's not being used in at least one course at our institution? And if the answer is, well, the textbook isn't even used, you might not ever put it into your database. However, the flip side of the way you could think about it is, well, we just get a list of textbooks from all the different textbook providers, and then our instructors can choose books if they want to, but if somebody adopts a book, then nobody else is allowed to use that book in any of their other classes. But we'd still have kind of an overarching list of textbooks, and some textbooks get used once and only once, and some textbooks never get used. So in that case, that additional, this one right here, right, this first one could potentially be changed to, what happened there? My screen just totally changed and all I can see is this weird stripe at the top. I was trying to draw on it and it got all goofy.
Oh, I don't know.
Anyway, that the minimum might be a 0 and might be a 1. I think I would argue for probably the minimum 0, where a textbook could exist on the table on the textbook side of things, but not in the other side of things. I think that's probably what I would argue for personally.
Okay.
Other thoughts though? At this, again, there's room for interpretation on a lot of these things. And what we can't do in this class is we can't go back to the original person who was offering this problem and say, hey, do you have a list of 1,000 textbooks and only use 100 of them? Because if their answer is, oh yeah, we get a list of every textbook from all of these providers, then we know how they actually operate. But since this is a fictitious question, we just made it up for the class. I can't go ask the real university how they actually do things. In the real world, what would I be doing? I'd be asking. And they might say, we don't ever even type the book in unless it's been adopted by at least one class. All right, that's how you do it. So we have to use our imagination in some cases. I think there's a reasonable argument both directions. Yeah, for sure. Great. Okay.
Quick question.
Please, let's go ahead and answer some questions. I think Shashank just spoke up first, and then if there are other ones, I'll answer those as well.
Yeah, so I guess I'm just a little bit confused still about the kind of diamond in the middle, the identifier. I guess, or I guess
so the diamond in the middle, if it doesn't have a square around it, a rectangle around it, if it's just a diamond, it is just a place where you can draw the verb that describes how the two rectangles are basically relating to one another. So it depends on which direction you're drawing it, right? You probably have to write a verb that's going one direction, but you could write it for either direction. You could write the book is being used in, or the course is using the textbook. But it's really just a place where you can write a verb to further describe how the diagram is working.
Okay, but it doesn't constitute its own entity or anything like that. And also, what would happen if we didn't put that there? Would it still be equally as valid as a relationship?
So yes, because there's no common terminology in terms of how we use these diagrams, if you don't want to draw the diamond, that's fine. I would argue, and Elise and I actually talked about this, that more information is almost always better, right? So if you can further describe things and it illustrates what you're thinking, and a verb is often really useful. So you're saying the book is being adopted by a course, or the course adopted the book, right? I'm thinking the word adopt. Oh, wow, that's a verb that actually works both directions. That's fairly informative. I like that. But if you gave me the same picture and it didn't have the diamond, there was no verb, but I saw the crow's feet and I saw the mandatories and the optionals, as somebody who's done this many times, could I still interpret that drawing and figure out what's going on? Probably. So as long as the drawing is clear to your audience, right is right. Yeah.
Okay.
The critical parts are definitely whether it's optional or required, which is the 0, 1 on the first part of it, and then whether it is one or many, which is the one or the crow's foot kind of up close to the entity. As long as you're getting those right, you're telling most of the story. The other part that we have not seen any of these drawings, but we might think about, especially as we move a little bit farther into class, and definitely in these next examples, is what are some of the attributes that would go into these entities, which ones are primary, so which ones would you underline, where would they go, because sometimes those attributes go in different places. But for these simple examples, we didn't bother because they're fairly self-explanatory. Now that we're about to get into some bigger problems, we'll see that maybe there's an opportunity to be more illustrative.
Okay, thank you.
Question. Was there somebody else that had a question? Okay.
I was going to ask the same question. So
Oh,
thank
great.
you.
Perfect. Good job, Shashank. You're asking questions that other people are thinking about. All right. Let's go ahead and do some breakout rooms. We're all going to work on the same problem. I'm going to give you guys maybe 10 minutes to kind of discuss the first problem, and then we'll come back together and talk about what we're coming up with as far as a good example of this. Looks like we can probably do 5 groups. So this is the first time I've done this, so we'll kind of see how this works. But I'm going to try to create some breakout rooms here of 4 to 5 people. It's going to automatically assign you to some groups here. And then, like I said, I'm going to give you guys about 10 minutes, and I'll give you a little notification that says we're about to get back together. I would suggest to each group that you first designate somebody who's drawing the picture. So whoever feels like they've got the best skills at drawing on a computer, I would not be that person because my drawings are terrible. But if you got somebody who's a good illustrator, great. And then just talk amongst yourselves and see if you can figure this out. So we are looking at problem number 5, which is the conceptual model for a real estate company. And that does mean you're going to have to write some entities, the relationship between those entities, with as much as you can fill in on optional and mandatory many or one relationships. And I'd like to have at least one oval kind of branching off of each entity that identifies the primary key, the unique identifier for each entity. If you want to draw more than that oval, because it's important where a particular attribute goes, feel free. So you can be creative as far as this is concerned, but at least one oval with an underlined attribute that kind of describes how you would uniquely identify the information that's in each of these tables. Does that make sense to everybody? All right, cool. I'm going to send you guys off to your rooms, and I'll see you guys in about 10 minutes. All right, welcome back, everyone. Let's talk through this problem. Sort of looking through my list here, and I'm going to pick on Michaela Heiner from the first breakout room. I don't know who drew your picture, so whoever in your group drew your picture, if they will share their screen with the rest of us, that'd be great. And then, Michaela, let's talk through what you guys came up with as a group.
Okay, sounds great. I think Haley had the picture.
Yep, I'm sharing it. Cool.
Great.
Okay, yeah, so do you just want me to walk through
Yeah,
it?
talk us through it.
Okay, so whenever we started with the sales offices, there are assigned to either one employee or they can be assigned to many employees. And then going the other direction, there's only one employee assigned, maximum and minimum of 1. And then from the employee, the primary key is the employee ID. And then for the sales office, the primary key is the office number. And then for the other connection between sales office and employees, we put managed by, and kind of like the same relationship, but only the employee could either not manage it at the sales office or it could be a manager. So that's why we have the optional and then 1 right there.
Okay, so let me just pause you for a second. So everybody see that second relationship that's kind of above the sales office that says managed by, and what they're suggesting is there'd be that additional relationship which is optional for the employee. They might be a manager for a sales office, and if they are, they're a manager for one sales office and one sales office only, right? On the flip side, the other direction, the sales office has to have at least one employee as a manager, but only one employee for a manager. So again, thinking about the directionality of it, right? If you're moving from sales office to employee, have to have an employee that's your manager. If you're moving from employee to sales office, the employee might be a manager, but might not be a manager. If they are, they're a manager one time. Does that make sense to everybody? Good. Okay, keep going.
Okay, and then the other relationship coming from the sales office is that it lists properties. And so it either could list 0 properties or it could have multiple. And a property can only be listed with 1 sales office, which is why there's the min and max of 1. And the primary key off property is the property ID. And we had the associative entity as owned between property and owners. And because that is both many to many. And then for owners, we have an owner ID. And then lastly, for the company, we weren't really sure where exactly to put it, like what to connect it to, the company entity, or if it even needed to be there.
So does anybody else from the peanut gallery want to chime in on what to do with company?
I think in the first class you said to not put the overarching entity.
Yeah, John is correct. In this case, there's one company. Doesn't need to be modeled, doesn't be included in it at all. You just drop it out. It doesn't have any connection. I mean, it has a connection to everything, but everything is in it. You just don't model it. It's not part of the model. Just a couple of little tiny things. When you have that associative entity, you didn't have to draw the symbols because we know this, but it wouldn't hurt also. Going from the associative entity owns towards owners, it's a mandatory one, right? You'd have the 2 double slashes because it has to have an owner and can only have 1 owner in each little kind of relationship. And same thing the other direction. The owner has a 1-1 with the property. Yeah. Has to have that relationship. And so all that own is basically saying owner with a property, owner with a property, owner with a property. And what's unique about that is if an owner is in there with a specific property, you only list that combination of those 2 things once. And once you have that, you know that that owner is an owner of the property. There might be multiple owners for properties, for sure. And they might even have like additional information about how much they own, some fractions, something like that, when they started, whatever. I mean, there might be more information in there, but a minimum of that pairing of the owner ID and the property ID. Great job. Very well done. Thank you, guys. Let's take a quick look at group 2s and see if it's in any way significantly different or anything worth discussing. So I have James Warman chosen from the breakout group 2. Again, I don't know who your drawer was, but have them show your screen and we can talk through it.
Sounds good. Can someone share that?
On it, 1 second.
So pretty similar. We didn't add the, what's it called? The triangle, just the part for manager. We just kind of typed that in. And
well, you
one
have
thing,
the relationship there, right? So you still have the additional relationship from managed by.
Right. And we weren't sure what to do about location and we kind of ran out of time, but we were wondering if you can add like sub, like for location that includes street address, like zip code, etc.
Yes, it's basically kind of a multi-valued attribute, but really it's multiple attributes that would have each of those things, and that's fine how you guys are kind of listing it there. So I don't see anything really significantly different from a structure. Is there anything from a relationship standpoint you guys did differently?
I don't think so. I think we were really lucky that Elise had already drawn hers out for us.
Yeah. Hey, everybody that's in the breakout rooms that had the drawings basically pre-done by one of your group mates, make sure that you are patting them on the back and offering them a virtual cup of coffee. Some of you had some really good artists already doing this stuff. Great. All right. Well, this looks good for this problem. Hopefully, through your discussion with your group mates in the breakout rooms, it's making some sense. If you're looking at these drawings and you're thinking, man, I don't know, schedule a meeting with me. We should talk through it a little bit more. Or feel free to, during this next breakout session, say, hey, this person seems to really know what they're talking about. Let's try to schedule a meetup outside of class and talk about it a little bit more. And feel free to do some peer assistance. That'd be great. Yeah, because some of you are definitely getting it. I don't know if everybody's getting it. Let's move on to the next problem, because the next one is definitely a lot more tricky.
Can I ask one quick question?
Yeah, please.
So for the associative entity, on the other side of it, where it's that mandatory one, will that always be there?
Yep. The associative entity basically can't exist unless it is a participant in both sides of the equation. It has to have a property and an owner. Otherwise, what is the point, right? There is nothing to own, and it's not owned by anyone. So if you're drawing an associative entity and you're thinking, you know what, this could kind of be optional, then something's wrong, for sure.
All right, great. Thank you.
Yeah, good question. All right, so I'm gonna break you guys back out again. We are obviously moving on to problem 6. And again, I'll give you maybe a little bit longer on this one because this one's potentially a little more complicated. This is the Marathoner Monthly Magazine, where they're trying to design a database to record the details of all major marathons and all the professional marathon runners. So I'm gonna ask you guys to rejoin those breakout rooms, and I'll give you guys some time to actually work through it. And then we will reconvene and talk about that problem as well. So the breakout rooms are still there. Just go ahead and jump back into them, and we'll get back together here in probably 10 to 15 minutes. Thanks, everyone. All right, looks like we're back together. Let's talk about this problem. This one is in some ways a little trickier, yeah? At least in an initial conversation, I find that it usually is, but let's see if we can figure it out. From breakout room 3, I've got John Mitchell highlighted. John, will you talk us through this and have whoever your artist is share their screen with us?
I will do my best. Okay. So we worked through for a little bit. Can you all see the screen?
Yeah.
Okay. So I have marathon connected to race as race. So I differentiated the race as a specific instance of the marathon. Like if marathon was the Boston Marathon, then I don't know, a race would be like the 2018 Marathon. And then we associated the number of competitors that it said it tracked, condition, date, and then I added a race ID to give it a unique identifier. I added a marathon ID to give a unique identifier to the marathon. The only issue, I wasn't sure where we could use like a unique identifier for the runner, since based on the rhetoric of the question, it seemed like the race kept track of its runners independently of whatever magazine. So I wasn't sure how they would identify their runner, but I guess you could have a runner ID. We were thinking about those numbers that you have on the front of your chest, but again, I think that's specific to the race. But each runner will be associated, or each race will be associated with at least one runner, many runners, up to many runners. Each runner can be associated with a race, and they may be associated with many races, kind of the same relationship with a marathon. Except this should be at least one. I don't know why.
So a couple interesting things here, and we're going to probably look at somebody else's and then kind of come back around, but you've got multiple relationships here. This is kind of interesting. And then, but what I really want to talk about just on this particular drawing, because I think this is a good opportunity for learning here, is this one right here. This is an attribute you guys included for race, which is the number of competitors. Do you think, this is asking the class, that we should store that information in a table?
I'm gonna think probably not, since you already have recorded all the runners and you could just count them.
If you have a relationship between the race and the runners, and we're going to talk about how we can potentially diagram this, but if you have a relationship between that, can I ask the database, hey, how many people ran in the 2016 Boston Marathon, and get an answer? Probably, right? I can probably go query that and ask a question and say, oh, there were 32,000 people, and I can show you exactly who those were. And how many professionals? It's around 200, 198. I can probably give you that list. So this is a great example. We do talk about it in the earlier slide deck, but I wanted to address it, and I'm really glad actually that we have a picture that shows this, of a situation where there's information that we want to know, but it is not something we would want to hard code. It is something that we would want to let the program generate for us, because it's going to be way more accurate. And if something changed, in the database, we suddenly realized, oh, we forgot to enter this person. We just fill them in properly in the database. And then when we ask again how many people ran, we auto generate that number again and get the right answer. You would not want to store this in a table. You would want to auto generate it. So let's table this example for now. And let's take a look at somebody else's and compare and contrast. And then we can maybe come back to this one and talk about it a little bit more. But let's move on to another groups and see what they came up with. For breakout room 4, I've got Michael Grogan. Michael, if you'll have somebody in your, I guess it's Clay Grogan, sorry. If you'll have somebody talk a little bit or show their screen and then you can talk us through this, that'd be great.
Sweet. Nathan, please.
Yeah, coming up.
Sweet. Appreciate it, bro. So we went under the assumption that like the professionals would be separated already from the other runners. And then we created the associative entity runs because we didn't want to have the crow's feet pointing the opposite ways. And then we have it connected to races, and then we have the attributes connected to that, like runner time, runner finish, date, and etc. like that.
Okay, so let's again, I'll annotate a little bit. And you guys are seeing my annotations. Yes, you're seeing what I'm drawing on these things. Okay, great. Again, this is new. So this part I think is critical because let's talk about it. We have races and there's a single race. There is the Boston 2022 marathon. And then we have professionals and each individual is going to be recorded. But then we have a relationship between those, which is the athlete that's participating in that specific race. That's a perfect situation for an associative entity, right? Which will have the pros identifier, some sort of unique identifier, runner ID is great, connected to the race ID. So they participate in that particular race. So I do think you need an associative entity between the participants and the event that they participated in. Think about it as courses and students and how they're enrolling in a class. It's a very similar situation. But this drawing does something that I think we need to talk about more, which is where they're putting their various attributes. This table down here at the bottom is, oops, this guy down here is races. So it's going to be something like Boston Marathon 2022. How does this fit into that? Because that's an individual runner time. So are you going to have Boston Marathon 2022 and then you have 200 separate times for the 200 professional runners?
Yeah, I think we needed to put that with the pros there so it identifies.
Ooh, great. Is that Shashank that just spoke up?
Yes.
Yes. Wrong. Thank you so much for being wrong, though. That's great.
Okay.
Do we want to put this here? I am a professional runner. Yeah, I wish. Ted Boone ran in the 2022 Boston Marathon, came in second place, lost by 3 seconds to, I don't know, somebody. Do I want to store my runner time and my runner finish in my table about me? What happens if I then decide I'm going to win it in 2023?
Oh, it should actually go on the associative identity because you've combined both.
Yeah. Right? These need to go over here. Right? When I participate in a particular race, so I have that combination of me and the race. What do I then want to know? How long it took me to run that race. Right? That's not unique to the race. It's not unique to me. It's unique to my relationship with that race. So the runner time, the runner finish, whatever you want to call it, is unique to the relationship between the race and the runner. This is where I'm going to want to see a couple of head nods. You can be as vigorous or as doubting as you want. Yeah? See what I'm talking about here, right? I want to know for my specific relationship with a specific race, what my time was. So if we look through the details here, the runner's time and finishing position would be recorded in the associative entity. The personal details like name, gender, and age would be recorded in the professional runners table. The Number of competitors would be something I calculate. The date of the race would be in the races table. So you got to think about these things. Where is it unique? Well, the race happened on a very specific date and time. So we're going to record that in the specific race. But the actual results of each runner are going to be recorded in the associative entity. So this is an interesting problem for sure. There's a lot of stuff going on here. There's also a lot of extraneous information potentially. They talk about how there could be thousands of runners, but only 200 are professional runners. What do we care about the thousands of runners? We don't, it turns out. Not for this database. Marathon and Monthly Magazine only records how the pros are doing. So if you are an amateur, like I actually am, they don't care about you. They're not going to have any of your information in there. Yeah. Now, how easy would it be to build this thing out to include regular runners and professional runners? Probably pretty easy, right? Because the table for runners would probably look extremely similar. And what you might have then is an additional attribute that says professional or amateur, right? Sort of a choice. And you could be one or the other, and you could flip back and forth if you made it from amateur status to professional status. And you'd still have this entity, this associative entity that would show how you performed in a particular race at a particular time. And you could go back and look. If I'm looking at this particular race on this particular date and I go back and look at this person, I'd know something about them. Or if I am looking at a particular person, I can look at all the races they participated in and I could look up information about that race. It's kind of trace through the various entities to get information from them. Yeah, does that make sense to everybody? This is a cool problem for sure. So if we did go back and look at the previous diagram, I think some of the stuff that was missing was this associative entity idea. You guys are trying to connect up the runners directly to the races, but you're kind of missing that middle entity. And then the other thing that you guys did was you had the race separate from the event. So you had sort of like Boston Marathon as a parent event. And then you had the specific event, which would be like the 2019 version or the 2020 version, the 2021 version. And that could work, but I might suggest to you what would be easier is kind of combining those two tables, and you'll just have each individual race and the date that it was run as an individual row in a table. So we're kind of combining those two entities down into one. Okay, so for John's example, we can kind of simplify that just a little bit to get to where we need to be in terms of recording the races. Because what we really care about is a specific instance of a race, not that it has a separate name or anything along those lines. Okay.
I have a
Good.
question about the runner finish piece, like what place they finished in. Would that be something that we would want to store in the database, or is that something that we could just query since we're already storing their time?
That is a great question. I would suggest to you that it is probably also something that you could record or calculate, right? Because you can just look at all the times and say, well, whoever the smallest time was first, second, third. You just sort the data and then pull the top 10. I suppose you might hard code it because it could be something where the finish time still doesn't actually reflect their finishing position because of a penalty or I don't know, something outside the norm where we looked at things afterwards and even though their time was great, they don't qualify for first place for some reason. I don't know. Maybe an amateur was actually in first place. That's not unheard of, where somebody comes out from nowhere and crushes the professional field. And so even though the professional had the best time, they're second or third. So I don't know. There's some wiggle room there. Probably it's something that's calculatable, but if you wanted to hard code it, I could see where there might be an argument for that. Great question. Other questions about any of the problems we looked through today? Did the breakout rooms work okay? Hopefully that was fun and useful for you guys to kind of compare and contrast notes with each other. Yes? Okay, good. We're going to keep doing that because I think that is the best way of learning it. I am not trying to shirk my duties. I think that you guys are doing a good job of kind of informing each other how you're working through it, and that trial and error process is very useful. So I'm going to end the recording. Thank you guys for today, and then I'm going to still spend a couple minutes talking about what we're going to be doing next time.